We appreciate your service, Marcus, but we need someone who's better at managing perception. That's what they told me, as if integrity was a flaw. My name is Marcus Ellison. I'm 43, and for over a decade, I was the face clients trusted at Virion Capital. I wasn't just another suit. I was the reason half of our largest clients signed in the first place. I never lied to them. Not when a project was late. Not when a deal soured. Not when the numbers weren't what they hoped. But the board didn't like that. They wanted polish. They wanted spin. So one morning, without warning, they escorted me out a man who'd brought in over $90 million in revenue over the years for mismatched values. They thought I'd go quietly. They didn't know what I had planned. I remember walking out of that glass tower with a cardboard box in my arms and something else in my chest. Not just rage, not just grief. It was purpose. They thought the clients loved Virion. But I was Virion to them. I spent that same week reconnecting with old contacts, not to gossip, not to burn bridges, just to check in, see how they were doing. One by one, they answered my calls with surprise and anger. Wait, you got fired? Why? What do you mean too honest? That's why we trusted your firm. The next day, two longtime clients, both worth millions in contracts, scheduled emergency meetings with Virion. Within 48 hours, they terminated their agreements. By the end of the week, 3 more followed. Then came the press. Somehow, word got out a senior relationship manager ousted for over-communicating the truth. A few journalists smelled blood. A headline read, "Integrity doesn't pay at Virion former exec speaks out." I never said a word publicly. I didn't need to. My clients were already speaking for me. 2 weeks later, I launched something new. Ellison True, a boutique consultancy focused on transparent strategy and long-term client trust. It was lean, just me, and a former Virion analyst who quit in solidarity. But within a month, our phones wouldn't stop ringing. Within 3 months, Ellison True had become more than a whisper in the industry. We were a rising storm. The same executives who once dismissed me as too principled were now scrambling. Virion's reputation was bleeding. Clients didn't just leave, they started talking. Quiet dinners turned into strategy sessions. Rumors swirled of mismanagement, hidden write-offs, and short-term gains that masked long-term risks. And I knew all of it because I built those systems. I didn't need to expose them. All I had to do was let the truth surface. By the 6th month, we had poached over a dozen of Virion's top-tier clients, each one coming to us voluntarily. Not because we promised better rates, but because we promised honesty, the very trait that got me fired. One evening, I received a message from a former junior exec at Virion. Thought you should know board just voted. CEO's stepping down next week. The same man who looked me in the eye and said, "We need people who are willing to play the game," was now being forced out for losing the trust of the very clients I once protected. And in that moment, I didn't feel triumph. I felt justice. It didn't come from revenge. It came from being consistent when it cost me everything and letting karma do the rest. But the story wasn't over. Because just as I settled into the quiet satisfaction of rebuilding what I lost, a letter arrived. From someone I hadn't heard from in 18 years. And that changed everything. It was a plain envelope, no return address. Just my name, written in small, neat handwriting I hadn't seen in nearly 2 decades. Inside was a letter. "Marcus, I saw what you've done, what you built. I never thought I'd write to you again, but I need to tell you the truth. Not just about why I left, but about what I took with me." My hands trembled as I read. Her name was Anna. We'd been partners once in more ways than one. Co-founders of a startup that never took off. She disappeared right before our product was about to launch, along with the prototype and our investor list. I thought she'd ghosted me for money. But the letter told another story. She had been threatened by the same people who later funded Virion. They had buried our tech. then hired me years later, pretending not to know who I was, while quietly leveraging what we had built. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. Everything, my firing, their success, the sudden rise and fall, it had all been scripted on a playbook we wrote. And now she had resurfaced, with evidence. They thought you'd never find out, but I kept everything. The original code, the files, the wire transfers. I want to make it right, Marcus. If you still care. I didn't sleep that night. Because if what she said was true, Virion wasn't just unethical. It was built on theft, on betrayal, on us. And suddenly, my victory didn't feel like the end. It felt like the beginning of something much bigger. I flew to Lisbon 2 days later. That's where Anna was. The address was scribbled on the back of the letter, a small apartment tucked away in Alfama, the oldest district in the city. When she opened the door, it was like stepping into a memory. I thought I'd burned out of my mind. She looked older, tired, but the same sharpness was in her eyes. Neither of us said anything for a moment. Then finally she spoke. I thought they'd come for me first. Inside, the walls were lined with old servers, hard drives, manila folders, bursting with notes and USB sticks. She handed me a drive labeled Project Heron, V1. It was our prototype, the one we spent 3 years building. It was still intact. She pulled out a file from a folder and dropped it on the table. Wire transfers. Timestamps. Emails from Virion's founders, dated weeks before they even hired me, referencing code snippets I'd written. Designs we'd drawn together in Anna's garage. Even early-stage testing results. Only we could have known. They hadn't just stolen our work. They'd planned to erase us entirely. I felt cold, but Anna wasn't done. They buried us, Marcus. Buried you, but they missed something. I kept logs, backups, proof that it was ours first. I looked at her. Why now? She hesitated. Because they're vulnerable. There's a whistleblower inside. Someone who knows the launch was fake. That your algorithm wasn't optimized, it was intentionally slowed to justify their layoffs. They needed a fall guy. That's why they let you go. Everything clicked. My caution, my refusal to push unstable code, it wasn't incompetence, it was inconvenient. I was too close to the truth. I want to destroy them, she said, but I can't do it without you. I stared at the drive, at the evidence, at her, and I said, then let's finish what we started. Under the dim glow of a Lisbon street lamp, Anna and I sat in silence. The weight of what we were about to do pressed heavy on both of us. Not just revenge, but revelation. We weren't just proving they stole from us. We were showing the world who they really were. Over the next 5 days, we worked like we used to, barely sleeping, fueled by espresso and fury. Anna decrypted logs that Virion thought were long gone. I rewrote parts of our original code, matching them line by line with the version Virion claimed was theirs. The similarities weren't just uncanny, they were undeniable. On the 6th day, we got a message, an anonymous email. Subject line. I know what they did to you. Inside was a single name, Rachel Kim. She was a junior dev at Virion, young, brilliant, barely noticed, and apparently she'd seen everything. Her email detailed internal conversations, faked QA reports, and a Slack thread where one of the CTOs literally joked about burying Marcus's version 6 feet under. Anna's knuckles turned white reading it. Rachel wanted to help. She had files, internal documents, a backup of the launch code with my name still in the metadata. We flew her to Lisbon under the radar. She was scared, shaking when she walked into our apartment, but determined. They took my silence for granted, she said, just like they took your work. With her help, we compiled everything, a digital portfolio of betrayal, theft, and corporate rot. We sent it to 3 major tech journalists, not anonymously, not this time. I used my real name. I was done hiding. The first article dropped 2 days later. Virion's dark secret, whistleblowers, stolen code, and a faked product launch. The fallout was nuclear. Shareholders panicked. Clients pulled out. The board launched an emergency internal investigation, and within 48 hours, the CEO had stepped down. But it didn't end there. A week later, I got a call. It was from someone I hadn't spoken to in over a decade, Thomas Gray, one of the earliest investors in Virion and the man who once told me I wasn't CEO material. He wanted to talk, not about apologies, but about buying the rights to the original platform. Anna and I looked at each other. We didn't answer right away, because now we had the leverage. We met Thomas Gray in a private lounge above the Tagus River. The man looked older, heavier around the eyes, but still had that signature Wall Street sharpness, like he could smell opportunity bleeding through the walls. I read everything, he said, placing a thick folder on the table. The press, the code comparisons, Rachel's statement. He paused. You've got them by the throat, Marcus. I didn't flinch. Good. He leaned back. I want to invest, not in the old platform, in the next one. Yours and Anna's. Anna raised an eyebrow. And why would we trust you? He smiled. Because I know when I backed the wrong horse, and because now you hold the cards. We didn't say yes right away. We made him wait 6 days. During that time, our inbox exploded. Developers from around the world, old clients, even former Virion employees, all offering support, collaboration, funding. And something even more unexpected, a letter from the European Innovation Council. They'd seen the articles, the evidence, the resilience. They wanted to back our new venture with a 2.5 million euros grant. Suddenly, we weren't fighting for scraps. We were building an empire. We named the company Ravelight. It stood for clarity, for threading together the truth from chaos. Anna led the technical vision. Rachel joined as head of ethics and compliance. And me? I finally stepped into the CEO role they once said I wasn't strategic enough for. Turns out, strategy was just something they couldn't recognize, because it didn't look like greed. We launched the beta in 5 months. Sleek, transparent, revolutionary. And guess what? On the exact anniversary of the day I was fired, Virion filed for bankruptcy. Public trust collapsed. Lawsuits piled up. Their leadership was exposed for more than just theft, securities fraud, investor deception, and tax evasion. Anna watched it all unfold with a quiet smile. I didn't celebrate. Not outwardly. But late that night, on the balcony overlooking the Lisbon skyline, I raised a glass. Not to revenge, but to truth, and to every person who was ever told they were too careful, too soft, or not quite a fit. We weren't broken. We were just ahead of our time. 3 months after Ravelight's launch, something unexpected happened. A major global nonprofit, Data for Humanity, approached us. They were building a cross-border digital transparency framework to expose corruption in public procurement systems across developing countries. They needed a platform that prioritized integrity, traceability, and above all, trust. They chose us. Not Oracle, not IBM, not any of the legacy giants. Us. It was surreal. The very values that got me fired, my insistence on caution, on due diligence, on transparency, were now the reason we were being entrusted with data that could literally change lives. But with that recognition came something more dangerous. One evening, Rachel came into the office, pale and shaking. She'd received an anonymous email, encrypted, routed through layers of spoofed domains. It contained confidential Virion documents, internal memos, whistleblower testimony, even chat logs between execs discussing offshore accounts and regulatory bribes. Someone on the inside wanted us to expose the truth. Anna and I debated all night. If we released this, it could destroy the lives of people who still worked there. People who had nothing to do with the corruption, but if we stayed quiet, we would become exactly like the people who once betrayed us. In the end, we didn't leak it to the press. We gave it to the prosecutors. Quietly. Anonymously. And then we went back to work. Because real revenge, the kind that changes things, isn't explosive. It's quiet, consistent, patient. 2 months later, the CEO of Virion was arrested at Heathrow. Front page of The Guardian. And in small text buried at the end of the article. Tipped off by an anonymous source close to a European ethics-focused tech startup. We didn't need our names on it. We already had something they never would: peace. And finally, freedom. The headlines caused a storm. Within hours, media outlets from New York to Berlin were dissecting Virion's fall. Investors pulled out, the board dissolved, and employees, many of whom once looked through me like I didn't exist, suddenly had their inboxes filled with consulting offers and career advice from Ravelight. But we didn't gloat. We had bigger plans. The exposure of Virion put us in the crosshairs of both fans and enemies. Overnight, Ravelight became a symbol of resistance, of ethical rebellion. Our user base tripled. Universities asked us to speak. Whistleblowers started coming to us, not just from finance, but from healthcare, energy, government. It was no longer just a product. It was a movement. But then something happened that I never expected. My former boss, Douglas Carr, who once called me a liability, showed up at our Berlin office, unannounced. He waited in the lobby for nearly 2 hours. I found him sitting there, tie loosened, looking like a man who'd finally seen the ghost he'd spent his life running from. "I was wrong," he said. "You were trying to fix the cracks. I just kept painting over them." He handed me a folder. Inside was a proposal, not for a job, not for money, but for a collaboration between our platform and a new initiative he'd started, aimed at supporting transparency in conflict zones. Real work, real change. I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no. Because maybe that's what justice looks like sometimes. Not revenge, not public takedowns, but watching the ones who broke you try to rebuild something better from the rubble. I stood in that courtroom, not as a broken man, but as someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to reveal. My voice was calm, but each word struck like thunder. I laid out the emails, the falsified invoices, the whistleblower reports I had kept copies of. Names, dates, motives. The silence was electric. I saw the color drain from Andrew's face as I turned toward him. "You tried to erase me, but you forgot one thing. I built everything you're now trying to control, and I kept the receipts." The courtroom buzzed. Reporters scribbled, cameras clicked, and then came the shocker. I wasn't the only one. A former intern, a current developer, and even an old HR executive had come forward, all with their own stories of coercion, manipulation, and ethical rot. My testimony had cracked something wide open. 2 weeks later, the company's stock plummeted. Board members resigned. Andrew was arrested for fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. The empire he hijacked was collapsing. As for me, I didn't want the company back. I wanted freedom, and I had it. I took a settlement not out of desperation, but as fuel. I launched my own venture. Small at first, but built with heart, integrity, and the kind of team who knew what real loyalty looked like. And as our first product went live, eclipsing the feature Andrew once stole from me, I stood on that modest stage, looked out at my new team, and smiled. Not because I'd won, but because they finally lost, exactly the way they deserved to. The months that followed felt surreal. Every day, headlines echoed what I had known all along. The empire was rotten from the inside. My face appeared on morning news shows, podcasts, business columns, not as a disgruntled former employee, but as the man who pulled back the curtain. They called me the architect who fought back. But the fame didn't matter. What mattered were the messages, hundreds of them, from people like me. People who'd been silenced, discarded, underestimated. "You gave me hope," they wrote. That meant more than any interview or speaking gig ever could. Still, part of me wrestled with bitterness. I had given 16 years of my life to that company. I missed the quiet satisfaction of building something great with a team I trusted. That part had been real before it was poisoned. Then one evening, something changed. I got a message from Maya, the same intern they had pressured years ago. She had just read the full case details. She told me how after leaving she finished school, built a startup of her own, and credited my courage for inspiring her to do it. "People like you," she wrote, "don't just expose corruption. You remind the rest of us to never settle for less than we're worth." It hit me hard. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a man who'd lost everything. I felt like someone who had finally begun. The new company I started, we weren't trying to become the next billion-dollar empire. We were focused on transparency, impact, and building tech that actually helped people. No tricks, no bloated pitches, just clean code and clear values. And here's the twist. 6 months after our launch, we landed a government contract. It was the same one Andrew's company had been aiming for before the collapse. The irony? They cited our integrity and track record for selecting us. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. When you build with truth, you don't need revenge. The universe handles it for you. The government contract changed everything. We scaled faster than I expected, but this time, I did it right. No inflated promises, no glossy distractions. Every hire was intentional. Every decision was transparent. We reinvested in people, not just profits. And for the first time in a very long time, I slept peacefully. Meanwhile, Andrew's world was falling apart. One of his closest allies, a former CFO turned whistleblower. Emails surfaced. Secret accounts, falsified reports. I didn't have to say a word. The same media outlets that once praised him now dissected every shady decision he ever made. He was banned from boardrooms, stripped of honors, and eventually indicted. I didn't watch the trial. I didn't need to. Because something else had happened. Something more important. One afternoon, I walked into our small office and saw a team of 20 people laughing, working, thriving. Some of them were interns. Some were in their 50s. All of them were there because they believed in the mission. I realized this is the legacy I always wanted. Not stock options, not applause, but a place where no one gets tossed aside for doing the right thing. A place where integrity wins. And if you're wondering whether I ever spoke to Andrew again, I did, once. He called months after the trial, just to ask, "How did you pull it off?" I paused for a moment and simply said, "You fired the wrong person." Then I hung up. After I hung up, I stood there for a while, letting the silence soak in. The weight of years, the betrayal, the dismissal, the late nights questioning everything, it didn't crush me anymore. It fueled me. Because I didn't just survive. I thrived. 6 months later, we signed a partnership with a global logistics firm, the same firm that once denied me a contract when I was with Andrew's company. Now, they sought me out. Said they'd been watching, that they respected what we built. We onboarded them within weeks. Revenue tripled. My team, they got raises across the board. Not bonuses, permanent raises. I never forgot what it felt like to be used up and thrown out. And I swore, no one who builds this with me will ever feel that way. Then something strange happened. An article went viral, The Man Who Turned Exile into Empire. They told my story, my real story. Not the headline-friendly version with clean edges, but the gritty one, the politics, the betrayal, the vengeance. It struck a chord. Emails flooded in. People who had been burned, overlooked, shut down. They called me a symbol. I didn't want to be that. I just wanted to prove that doing things the right way wasn't weakness. It was power. And now I mentor others, quietly, privately. I don't chase the spotlight. But if you listen closely, you'll hear my name whispered in places Andrew can't go anymore. He built a kingdom on ego. I built a legacy on trust. And in the end, that's why I won. Aside for telling the truth. Where principles weren't liabilities, they were the foundation. That day, I wrote something on the whiteboard in the break room. Just a sentence. No one erased it, not even months later. Integrity scales. It became our mantra, not because it sounded good in pitch decks, but because we'd proven it. In the face of betrayal, collapse, and a quiet war, so many faced when they refused to compromise, we didn't just survive. We built. And not on someone else's back, not in someone else's shadow. From the ground up, with grit, with truth, and with people who saw value, not just in what we did, but in how we did it. So if you ask me today who I am, I'll tell you. I'm not the man they fired. I'm the man they couldn't erase. And now, I build for those who've been told they don't belong. Because they're the ones who'll change everything. Quietly, relentlessly. And with their names written in permanent ink.